Recent escalation of military objectives by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu marks a significant shift in the ongoing conflict with Hezbollah and Hamas. Israel carried out a massive operation against Hezbollah on Tuesday by hiding explosive material within a new batch of Taiwanese-made pagers that were imported into Lebanon. This has been confirmed by multiple American as well as other officials who've been briefed on the operation. The pagers, which Hezbollah had ordered from the Gold Apollo firm in Taiwan, had been tampered with before they reached Lebanon. Most of these were the company's AP924 model. There were other Apollo Gold models that were included in the shipment as well. The explosive material, some of which was less than 50 grams, was implanted right next to the battery unit in each of these pagers. A switch was also embedded that could be triggered remotely to detonate these explosives. At about 3:30 in the afternoon in Lebanon on Tuesday, the pagers received a message which first appeared though it was coming from Hezbollah's leadership. Instead, the message activated these explosives. Lebanon's health minister told state media at least 9 people were killed and more than 2,000 injured. The toll is expected to go up. The devices were programmed to beep for several seconds before they exploded. This was the most sophisticated and coordinated series of explosions that Israel has carried out in Lebanon since the war with Hamas began last October. On the 17th of September, Netanyahu announced that one of Israel's war goals is to facilitate the return of residents to the northern communities. Now, these are the communities which have been living along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. Over the years, they have been evacuated because of persistent cross-border attacks from Hezbollah, which is an Iran-backed militant group. This decision was made during a late-night security cabinet meeting, and it reflects the urgent need to address the humanitarian crisis facing tens of thousands of displaced Israelis. The conflict intensified following Hamas's assault on southern Israel in October last year, which led to a broader military engagement involving Hezbollah in the weeks and days that followed. Since then, Israel has faced almost daily confrontations with Hezbollah along its northern border. These hostilities have resulted in significant casualties on both sides, and it has forced many residents out of their homes because of the constant rain of rocket fire. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's updated war goals aim not just to reclaim the territory there, but also to restore normalcy for those who've been displaced. The Israeli government estimates around 60,000 residents have been displaced from the northern towns, which have suffered extensive damage during the ongoing rocket attacks. The Prime Minister's office also emphasized that enabling these citizens to return is now a priority within their military strategy against Hamas. Defense Minister Gallant has been vocal about the need for military action as the only viable solution to secure the northern border. He said that the window for an agreement with Hamas is closing, indicating that any diplomatic efforts with Hezbollah are becoming increasingly futile. Gallant's remarks come amid discussions with US officials about potential military operations that are aimed at stabilizing the northern border. He's also conveyed as much to America's envoy to the Middle East and one of the chief negotiators, Amos Hochstein. The US and its partners are worried that any direct military action against Hezbollah would lead to a wider Middle East war. Gallant's recent outspoken comments also raise questions about his own future within Netanyahu's cabinet. There is speculation running rife that Netanyahu is intent on replacing Gallant because of some of the comments that he's made about military actions in the recent days. This potential shift in the defense minister, virtually the person who's leading the military charge against Hamas and now increasingly Hezbollah, that could seriously impact Israel's defense strategy and also its internal politics. Remember, public opinion remains unfavorable to Netanyahu, with rising military casualties and, more importantly, the inability of Netanyahu's government to force Hamas to release the remaining hostages. The almost weekly protests against Netanyahu's government have only intensified in the last few months as the conflict drags on, and the possibility of a ceasefire looks bleaker. Netanyahu is eager to get rid of Gallant to ensure the stability of his governing coalition. And if that requires appointing a defense minister who is a total novice and moving towards the threshold of all-out war and foregoing the hostages, That is a political sacrifice or a political gamble that Netanyahu is willing to play. The announcement has drawn varied responses from regional players as well as international observers. Hezbollah has indicated that it might reconsider its position if a ceasefire in Gaza were to be established. That would, of course, complicate Israel's military calculus. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on a visit to Egypt this week. He has highlighted the ongoing international efforts to mediate a ceasefire, but the negotiations have been stuck for the last few months now. There is no clear progress in the negotiations involving Israel, Hamas, and various mediators like Egypt and Qatar. Returning to the question of repopulating the northern areas, returning the residents to northern Israel, that still poses significant risks, both in terms of immediate security and long-term stability. The decision to facilitate the return of displaced individuals, while it's politically motivated, must also contend with the reality of the ongoing hostilities on the ground. The most pressing concern is the continued cross-border attacks by Hezbollah. Despite the Israeli military's best efforts to try and push Hezbollah back and its capabilities, the group has in fact significantly enhanced its military arsenal. The last time Hezbollah and Israel went to war was way back in 2006. This time, it's a different entity that Israel is having to deal with. The terror group now boasts of over 120,000 standoff weapons. This capability raises fears that returning the residents to the northern areas, they could be exposed to daily rocket attacks or other forms of violence. Hezbollah, in fact, has shown a willingness to target both military and civilian sites in northern Israel. Reintegrating the residents into the northern communities could also inadvertently provoke further escalation, like what we are seeing in the West Bank right now. If Hezbollah perceives the return of civilians as a sign of Israeli resolve or a shift in its military strategy, it may respond with increased aggression. So this tit-for-tat dynamic could very fast spiral into a broader conflict, and that would risk not just the civilian lives, but also draw in regional powers like Iran and even perhaps the Gulf countries. The Israeli government faces significant domestic pressure as well to restore normalcy in the northern areas. However, if the situation deteriorates following the return of these residents, then public sentiment could shift dramatically against the government. The decision to repopulate northern Israel amidst the ongoing threats from both Hamas and Hezbollah may also strain Israel's international ties. The United States and other allies of Israel are concerned about a potential escalation that could draw them into a wider conflict, something that America can ill afford right now with just 2 months to go for the presidential election. It would not just be bad optics for the current incumbent, President Biden, but also a severe geopolitical headache for whoever is the next US president post-January, whether it is Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Which is perhaps why Amos Hochstein, America's envoy to the Middle East, warned Yoav Gallant during their meeting this week that any major Israeli offensive against Hezbollah would not lead to the return of evacuated northern residents. Instead, it would significantly raise the risk of a prolonged regional war. Netanyahu's declaration marks a critical juncture in Israel's military campaign against both Hamas and Hezbollah. By expanding his war goals to include humanitarian resettlement for the displaced residents of northern areas, the Israeli government aims to balance its military objectives along with domestic political pressures. But the effectiveness of the strategy remains contingent upon both military success against Hezbollah and the broader dynamics which are shaped by regional alliances and the ongoing diplomatic efforts to try and broker a ceasefire with Hamas. As these tensions continue to simmer along the Israel-Lebanon border, the coming few weeks will be crucial in determining whether these new objectives can be achieved at the same time without further escalating violence or drawing the region into a wider conflict.
حوالي الساعة 3:30 من عصر اليوم بدأت أعداد كبيرة من الجرحى بالتوافد على المستشفيات، وكانت هيدي الجرحى مصابة بشكل أساسي بانفجار بأجهزة اتصال بيجر كانت حاملتها. الأعداد اللي وصلت على الطوارئ كانت أعداد كتير كبيرة، وكان واضح إنه هي بمختلف المناطق. حتى الآن سجلت غرفة العمليات الطوارئ الصحية بوزارة الصحة العامة أكثر من 2800 جريح. حالة تقريبا 200 منهم هي حالة حرجة استوجبت إما إجراء عمليات جراحية أو إدخال على أقسام العناية الفائقة. وسجل كذلك سقوط عدد من الشهداء. العدد لهلأ 8 شهداء بما فيهم طفلة عمرها 8 سنين بالبقاع.
Again, I don't have any details to provide on the reports of the pager blast. I can tell you, to my knowledge, there's no U.S. involvement in this at all. Again, it's something that we're monitoring. And in terms of potential escalation, I go back to what I said earlier in terms of a key focus for this department and the U.S. government writ large is on working with partners in the region, to include Israel, to prevent the conflict between Israel and Hamas from spiraling into a wider conflict. And that includes the tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border. And so we'll continue to strongly advocate for a ceasefire and the release of the hostages, and we'll continue to strongly advocate for a diplomatic resolution to the tensions that we're seeing along the Israel-Lebanon border.
Thank you. Just following up on the pager's question, does DoD assess that this was an attack by Israel, and do you consider this an escalation of the tensions on the northern border?
Yeah, as far as what it is, again, I just don't have anything to provide. And as far as escalation, broadly speaking, in the Middle East, this is something that we've been paying attention to for more than almost a year now, since Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7. And so we've been very, very focused. The Secretary's been very, very focused on ensuring that that the tensions in the region do not escalate into a wider regional conflict. And as I highlighted at the top, that's something that continues to stay top of mind.